Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. This week we're talking about intolerant spaces both outside and inside our community. But this week's topic will be in the description of this video as usual, and it was just asking us to talk about intolerant spaces and how we navigate them, noticing that there are issues with intolerance both from people outside the pagan, huge general, umbrella of pagan, neo-pagan practitioners of magic, witchcraft, etc. community, demographic, if you will, outside it and inside it, from amongst people who we might consider part of our, albeit very broad and extensive community. How do we deal with that, and ways to approach that? So this is definitely not a completely new topic. We've talked about this before. We've talked about ways to deal with negativity, ways to deal with specific people coming from a specific place, I guess you could say, as far as like specific types of intolerance we've talked about. So my views on this over the years have not really changed that much, which is to say, I still think that I am one of the worst people to ask about this topic at this point, just because I have been consciously on this path for about 15 years now, and I've been doing this on the internet for 10 years, and throughout that time I have only gotten less and less tolerant of intolerance, if that makes sense. I am a lot less likely, as time goes on, I get less and less likely to put up with other people's bullshit. And now that's not to say if somebody comes to me and just honestly doesn't know something that I'm just gonna be mean to them about it. No, because there's a difference between simply not knowing and maybe being curious and being open to talking about things, and bullshit, like being a real jerk about it for to try to keep it slightly more PG in the language. So yeah, I never really did put up with a lot of bullshit from people, but now I'm even less likely to do so. So as far as the question of like how might we navigate moving in spaces that might be intolerant, my answer is that if I know that a space is intolerant and that I'm likely to come up against people, sorry for the noise by the way, I wanted to be outside today and lots of other people are outside and doing their thing too, so I don't know how much of that you're going to hear in the background of this video, but it's a nice day and we're moving into autumn, so I'm trying to take advantage of as many of the warmer days as possible. But anyway, if I know that a space is going to be intolerant before I decide to go into it, my decision is that I don't go into it. So essentially I do not move in spaces that are intolerant of who I am and of any of my personal beliefs or identities. So this is not just in my identity as a pagan, but in any of my identities whatsoever. I just don't move in those spaces. If there are people who have been historically negative to me or hostile to me about these things, I don't spend time with them. And I know that that is something that not everyone can just do or say. It depends on how old you are. It depends on maybe how long you've been doing this, because you might be an older person but newer to exploring your path in this way, your spiritual path. And you might already be married, you might already have kids, and so people very close to you in your life like that, if you are making changes in your spiritual path that you did not have certain spiritual beliefs or identities at the time that those people came into your life, and so your relationship with them is different, and then you're altering something, they have to adjust to that. And it's not always like, you're not just going to disown your kids or divorce your spouse because they don't agree with your newfound beliefs right away. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. So it absolutely depends on the situation. But, you know, for me, like, extended family members that have a problem with my practice, okay, like, that's fine. I don't need to spend time around them. People who otherwise might become friends who have extreme issues with any of my beliefs or identities, guess what? They're not my friend, because that's not what I'm looking for in a friend. And so yeah, I'm not one of the best people to ask about this type of thing, because I think a lot of time people might have issues with, like, you know, this person's been my best friend for my entire life, and now I'm exploring a new spiritual path and, like, figuring out who I am, and they are really negative about it, and I just don't know how to keep that friendship. And it's like, well, if you're friends, they will understand that you're still the person that they've been friends with for all this time, and they will still love you, and they should, I hope, respect you. And if they do not show you the respect that you deserve, being their friend for all this time, then to me that says maybe this is someone who isn't a friend to me anymore. So that can sound really harsh, and that's not what a lot of people want to do with their life, but that is how I have approached it. So that's really all I can share with you, is my personal perspective. That's what we're here to do on this channel. And that's how I've treated it. You know, I'm totally open to having conversations with people about our beliefs. You know, like my mom. My mom doesn't fully understand or agree with 100% of my beliefs or identities or anything like that. But we maintain our relationship because we love each other and we respect each other, and we can have discussions about things and just say, well, oh, okay, you know, I may not fully understand that or know where you're coming from, or I might have a very different belief about that, but these are areas where we can truly agree to disagree. You know, I think a lot of the time people use that phrase when they just don't really want to try to see where someone else is coming from, but I mean it, like, with my mom and I, it's in, like, a very true sense of we understand that we have different views, and that's okay. You don't have to have the exact same views as someone else in order to be friends with them or to love them or to respect them. But I think a lot of people seem to think that you do, because, yeah, there have been a lot of people throughout my life who just can't seem to get past the fact that I don't believe the same way as them. And I'm sorry, if you can't do that, then I just won't hang out with you anymore, you know? That's just how it is for me. And I think that that also comes from the fact that as pagans in our spiritual community, as it were, we have a belief, generally speaking, and this brings us into the intolerance from inside our community aspect. We generally have a belief amongst us that we know that none of us have the one correct or right way to do things, and that there is no one right way. So we generally operate in a way that we know and already accept from the get-go that not everyone thinks the same things about different subjects, and not everyone believes the same way, and that's just part of being who we are, is knowing that we have so much diversity. So I think that that helps me in how I relate to people from outside the community as well, because I don't expect them to agree with me. Where we come into issues is when other people expect us to adhere to their belief system, and then it poses a problem because they can't get their head around that. So this brings me into the negativity or hostility from inside the community, because unfortunately I do know where this week's question asker is coming from, and even with the example I just gave, I have run into people who identify as some type of pagan, or, you know, within this broad community that we may all go by different terms. I have run into people within this area who do expect all of us to adhere to their way of doing things. And to me, I think, I hypothesize that that way of thinking might come from the fact that many of us were raised with other religions before we found our path as pagans, and the religions that we were raised with might have that type of idea of there's only one right way. So some of us, I think, go from being taught that there's one right way finding a different way that we actually think is better for us, that for us is our way, but then the same type of linear thinking just sticks, and and then we end up thinking this is the one right way. Or it might have to do with just, as we're learning about things, you start to learn about something, and then the first thing you learn about it is, so far, it's the only thing you know, right? So we might trick ourselves into thinking that the first things that we're learning, the first books we're reading, the first authors we learn from, the first teachers that we find, we might trick ourselves into thinking that's the only answer, until we look farther, broaden our influences, read different books by different authors, find different teachers, go to public rituals hosted by different types of groups and paths, experience the way that it works for different people. Until we do that, we might have trouble seeing that it really is a very broad, diverse community, and that's okay, that's part of it. And it doesn't mean that you or it doesn't mean that any of us personally have to do all of the, abundance of different things that are out there, and it doesn't mean that we have to believe all of the different beliefs that are out there, because some of them might be contradictory, some of them might be contradictory but able to be held in paradox perfectly comfortably for some of us, But until we realize that, I think that the mindset of maybe having been raised with there is one right way and there's this and everyone else, people believe different things but they're wrong, I think that we might be carrying that mindset over into this community where it really doesn't apply. And so it involves deconstructing those types of things that maybe we were taught as kids or younger adults, because some people don't find their way into this community until much later in life. So yeah, that's just one thought that I have as to maybe like where that comes from. I don't know for sure. But yeah, I've had pagans in the past, not really anytime recently, but over the past 10 years that I've been on the internet. People on the internet just in general like to be mean sometimes when they feel like they can be anonymous, so that just happens. And I have had pagans on the internet before tell me that I was doing something wrong based on how their path, which was a totally different branch of paganism than what I even follow, for some reason they thought that everybody must do it that way. And I really think that that's just from a lack of exposure to the fact that no, this same thing can be done a lot of different ways throughout the community, and that they're all valid, to an extent. And when I say things like this, I'm talking about different practices, like, do you cast a circle or not? How? Do you work with the elements or not? Which system of the elements do you work with? Which direction, cardinal geographical direction on the compass do you assign to which element? Because those things can differ in different places. Do you work with deity as such or not? Which ones? All of these types of questions are things that differ greatly amongst all of us, and that's okay. But yeah, so I've had people say things like that they thought I should be using a specific ritual tool, or that I should be using it in a specific way because that's what their tradition taught them is the right way. And I was like, well, thank you for that input, but I don't even follow the same, I'm not even on the same path within paganism that you are, so what makes you think that I would necessarily have to follow the same thing that your path teaches you to do, And so I think that things like that come from a lack of exposure to the fact that there are other views and other ways of doing these things that are perfectly okay that we differ on. Like, tools are different, how we use them is different. Again, with circles, elements, all that type of thing, like, stuff like that is just different depending on who you are and what you're doing. And that's just understanding that, I think, is just part of understanding the wider community. And maybe not everyone has been exposed to that information. If you do happen to be raised within a specific tradition and that's the only thing you know, then it can be the same thing as being raised within one other, a non-pagan type of tradition. It's the same thing. If you're being raised with only one way and not being exposed to the fact that there are different ways to do it, we can end up thinking kind of a one-track mind type of thing, and then, you get on the internet where you feel like you can just be mean to people you've never met before and tell them what to do when you have no idea maybe what they're practicing and that there's something different, and that's a recipe for being a jerk on the internet, really. That's what that's a recipe for. I was gonna say disaster, but that's overly dramatic. I don't think it's that. So I don't know, that's just my theory about how that works. And when I encounter things like that, I tend to just explain to people, or I might ask them, like, okay, well, what tradition does that come from? Or where did you learn that? What source did you hear that from? And just explain, the difference between some things are facts, some things are opinions, and some things are personal preferences. There are some things that a lot of us across the board might agree on, even though we are from different paths, different traditions, and we do some things differently. There might be some larger core issues that we do agree with each other on. But there are also things that are really just personal preference. And so I try to point that out to people when they maybe want to prescribe something to someone else. When I've had people do that to me or any one of my friends, you might see me say, actually, yes, that is one valid way of doing it. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that that's the way you do it. However, this is a matter of personal preference. There are multiple ways to do it. So I don't know. And I really only ever come across that online. So, I don't think I've really ever come across very many pagan spaces in real life that I've gone into that have been really hostile like that about other paths, because if they seem like they're going to be like that, I don't enter that space. So really it's something like, if I'm already in a space and then I find out that people are being really negative about other people's views, I don't re-enter that space, and I don't continue having any sort of relationship or friendship or even acquaintanceship with people who are acting like that. If they're not willing to have a conversation, if they're not willing to be respectful of the way that different people do things within reason, again, I'm talking about practices that are just heavily diverse and don't really affect people's lives, but just do you cast a circle or not? That's not worth getting into a huge debate over, because people do it differently and that's okay, So stuff like that, if they're not willing to have a conversation about it and realize that we can still be respectful, knowing that we do things differently, then yeah, they're just not people that I will continue to associate with, pretty much. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it. Again, that might seem kind of harsh, and I know that depending on the person and the relationship you have with them, who might be the person being negative or hostile, it will not always be so easy to just say, bye, I'm not gonna hang out with you, I'm not gonna associate with you anymore. That is just how it's worked out for me with certain people in my life. I cannot tell you what to do about specific people in your life. I can only tell you that you deserve respect, and that I hope, it is my hope, that people who love you and people who care about you will respect you and will want you to be happy and will want to maybe learn about what it is you're doing in order to even get to know you better and understand you better and make that love and caring more deep than it already is. So that is my hope. I think you are worthy of that, you deserve that, and I hope that your journey is a safe and an enjoyable one. And that's about as much as I can rightly say, since I am just me giving you my perspective, and I don't know you or your situation. So I hope that that helps, or at least helped you spend some time today. Please share your thoughts in the comments if you have any thoughts about anything that was brought up, or maybe some advice about how it's worked for you if you've been through something difficult like that. Maybe you can help the questioner out, and many other people, because I know many other people have this same question as well, even if they weren't the one to ask it this time around. I will see you next time. Happy October, by the way. Thank you for watching or listening, and until next time, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.